What's up, everybody? Welcome back. Corey Hughes, Bloody History. So I'm going to vent for just a fucking minute about these piece of shit video platforms that I'm never going to fucking use again. I don't give a fuck if you're YouTube, or if you're Rumble, if you're fucking Rockfin, if you're Odyssey. You can fucking suck my big fucking fat nuts. Seriously. These fucking companies, they exploit us. They don't ever fucking pay us. As it stands right now, as per Rockfin's own agreement, every 100 tokens they pay you out. They owe me 200 and something tokens. They haven't paid me out, haven't responded to any fucking emails. Fuck Rockfin. If you subscribe there for me, cancel. Okay? Please cancel. Because I'm not going to be on there anymore. I'm not going to be on fucking Rumble, who just acknowledges that we have fucking ads on our fucking channel, but just decides not to pay us for them. Okay? Fuck them too. We do about 150, 200,000 views, mostly Chris's stuff, but we're all one company, on fucking Rumble, and they don't pay us, period. They say they're not eligible for fucking advertising, even though they pump advertising on every fucking video. So if you are subscribed to any of the video platforms that I've participated in, you can cancel. I'm not doing this shit anymore. I will continue to allow YouTube to sync my audio podcast because that takes zero effort from me, which is about how much fucking money they pay me. Zero. So, if I don't make any fucking money off it, I can't afford to do this shit anymore, okay? Like, end of story. I seriously make about $1,500 a month. On a good month, I make $2,000. So I'm just not fucking putting any effort into anything that doesn't pay me anymore. None of this is fucking worth it if you haven't figured it out yet. Being a historian is dog shit. There's no money in it. There's no protection of your own assets or fucking survivability or anything. I've been scraping by for like 5 fucking years doing this, okay? And I'm over it. So I'm not fucking participating in anything that doesn't pay me anymore. Not because I'm a dick, but because I can't, okay? I can't afford to, all right? What I really can't afford to do is not have a fucking job. Really. I just moved. My rent went up $200 a month. My fucking other expenses went up about $300 a month. And I'm not making any extra money than I was 6 fucking months ago. So everything fucking sucks right now if you haven't figured it out. And so unless you're fucking paying me for the fucking stuff on World War II on Substack or listening to this podcast, I'm not participating anymore at all. So I appreciate every single fucking one of you, especially everybody who's donated to the cause or who has purchased a book. But I'm getting completely and totally exploited and taken advantage of by these video platforms, and so I'm not doing it anymore. And I don't give a fuck if it increases my exposure. Sorry, I'm not going to let myself be exploited because I have a small benefit from it. Like, end of story. So fuck these video platforms. If you continue to tune in here on Spreaker, I'd appreciate it. Or I'd really appreciate it if you tune into my Substack on World War II, because there's not another motherfucker in the world who's telling what's really going on in this world today and how the Jews are destroying everything. Okay, you're going to get that on my Substack. So what we're going to do today is we're going to continue to pick up where we fucking left off with Irwin Weiner, a fucking Chicago Jew who was definitely involved in the Kennedy assassination because Jews were behind the assassination. And so, let me see, we're on page 21 of 39. And this is the HSCA interview of Irwin Weiner, who is denying his involvement in everything and denying that he knew Jack Ruby or any of that stuff, right? You know, he knew him from years ago, but didn't have any recent contacts. So, this is Mr. Wolf, the lawyer for the HSCA, who is interviewing Irwin Weiner, and we're going to continue here. Would it refresh your recollection if I said the AGVA was the American Guild of Variety Artists? Could have been. They're talking about the union. It's a mob-backed union. Okay, the AGVA was not a legitimate organization. It was run by Mr. Dolan, who we'll talk about here momentarily, and it was basically used as a large-scale trafficking operation for fucking strippers and hookers. That's basically what the fuck it was. So. It could have been. Mr. Wolf says, have you heard that name before? Mr. Weiner says, yes. Mr. Wolf says, have you ever had any dealings with that union? Mr. Weiner says, no. Are you familiar at all with the AGVA's general procedures in 1963? Who? The AGVA. No. Do you know any AGVA officers or representatives? Not at all. Do you know Mr. Johnny Gatanas? No. Gattanas? No. Do you know Mr. James Henry Dolan? Wait, James Henry Dolan? Dolan. I know a fellow by the name of Dolan. Which Dolan do you know? He's a big fella. He's about 6 foot tall. How do you know him? I've taken him out on bond. When was that? I don't remember. That was maybe 15, 20 years ago. Where was he from? He was from Chicago. Did you ever have any subsequent dealings with Mr. Dolan? Not that I know of, other than him out on bond whenever that was. Do you know Mr. Ernest Fast? No. Do you know Mr. Alfred Capper? No. Do you know Mr. Jimmy Allegretti? Mr. who? Jimmy Allegretti. Yes, I knew him. Is he a friend of yours that you grew up with? I think I knew him all my life. Did you ever have any business dealings with him? No. Mr. Chairman, I think it's time it's appropriate for committee members to ask any questions they desire concerning the areas we've questioned on so far. Mr. Pryor says, do you have any questions? And Mr. Dodd says, no. I think we will wait until you have completed all of your questions. Mr. Weiner, during your discussions with Mr. Trafficante in Miami, you testified that you discussed your pending indictment with Mr. Trafficante. Probably. Did you discuss the fact that Mr. Trafficante was also under investigation in conjunction with your indictment? I don't remember discussing that as a result of my, not that I know of. Do you know Mr. Angelo Bruno? The name does not strike a responsive chord in me. It's kind of funny because Angelo Bruno is the head of the Philadelphia mob. So, of course, Mr. Weiner would know who he was. Concerning your discussions with Mr. Shore and his obtaining legal representation for Jack Ruby, what was the discussion in Los Angeles? Was that discussion in Los Angeles or Chicago? I don't remember. Was that discussion within 1 month, 2 months, or 3 months after Ruby shot Oswald? The last discussion I had with Mr. Shore was prior to my coming here. I told him why I was coming here. He reiterated that he had helped Earl Ruby obtain legal counsel, or he was instrumental in helping him, whatever it was, or he knew the attorney. I don't remember. This was just 3 days ago. You have no recollection of how soon after Ruby shot Oswald that discussion was? No. It had to be after that happened. I met Mr. Shore and discussed it with him, keeping abreast of what had happened to him. Do you know Mr. Philip Bosco? Who? Bosco, B-O-S-C-O. No. During 1970, did you ever meet Mr. Paul Roland Jones? Paul who? Roland Jones. No. Okay, so let me stop right there. Paul Roland Jones, another one of these fucking Chicago outfit guys who was all up with Jack Ruby and Ralph Paul John and all these guys. So, of course, he fucking knows who Paul Roland Jones is. Have you ever heard the name before? No. What about Paul Labriola? Yeah, I've heard that name. Do you know Mr. Labriola? I took him on bond. When was that? Had to have been in the 1940s. Have you ever had any dealing with him subsequent to that time? No, and I'm not looking forward to having any dealings with him. But you've had no dealings with Mr. Labriola subsequent to the 1940s? No. What about Mr. James Weinberg? Yes. How do you know him? Just took him out on bond. Was that the same time as Mr. Labriola? I don't remember. They were always in trouble. Did anybody specifically that you recall refer you to them? No, somebody would have to refer them to me. When did they first approach you? Could have been through an attorney. Are you familiar at all with a movie from the late 1940s from Chicago of individuals who were allegedly involved in organized crime? No. Do you know Carlos Marcello? No. Have you ever heard of him? Yes. Have you ever spoken with him? No. Have you ever spoken with anybody who has stated they were a representative of Mr. Marcello? Not that I know of. Have you ever met Jimmy Hoffa? Yes. What were the circumstances of your first meeting? Writing a bond for the Teamsters International under the Langram-Griffin Act. When was that? It would be around 1959. Who else was present at that meeting? Probably Alan Dorfman. Who introduced you to Mr. Hoffa? Alan Dorfman. What was discussed at that meeting? Getting a bond placed. He was having a problem. Was it one bond? It was a bond that covered the international. It covered each officer of each local that was a member of the Teamsters International. Was Mr. Bianca present at that meeting? I don't know if he was present at that meeting. Did you also have dealings with Mr. Bianca? Do you know him? Very well. How did you know him? Bianca was an attorney, president of the Summit Fidelity Insurance Company that I did business with. Let's pull out everything on Summit Fidelity. Alan Dorfman introduced you to Jimmy Hoffa? Right. What was the outcome of that meeting? Did your company, in fact, write a bond? Yes. What corporation was that? What corporation wrote the bond? Yeah, what corporation were you affiliated with at the time? We started out with the Illinois, then I took the business over myself. You incorporated your own agency? I think I formed another agency called Titan Management Corp. Did that management corporation take over all the Teamster pension bonding at the time? I received the commissions as a result of writing that bond in that agency. Approximately how much did you receive in commissions? A couple $100,000, I guess. Was that for year 1959? I don't remember. It was for the placement of that bond, the period that I had anything to do with it. Did your corporation continue to write bonds for the Teamsters? The corporation was just formed for the purpose of handling that. Just for that one? Yes. Did you have any other organization or agency which placed bonds for local Teamsters? No. Subsequent to 1959, what was the next time you met with Jimmy Hoffa? I don't remember. It was all as a result of these placements of the bonds. I think I wrote a bail bond for him at one time. I think I wrote a bail bond for him in Chicago. When was that? When he was indicted in Chicago. I think I wrote a bail bond for him. From the period of 1959 through 1970, did you continue to write bonds for the Teamsters Pension Fund? No. Was this the only bond they placed? This was a 3-year bond, and I had something to do with it for about 18 months. What terminated your involvement? They just went elsewhere, and the interpretation of the Labor Department had changed. Originally, it was a faithful performance bond. Then it became an honesty bond. A faithful performance bond sort of guarantees judgment also. When they changed their interpretation of any company could write the bonds, and they had no need for my services. Do you know Mr. Paul Dorfman? Yes. How long have you known Paul Dorfman? Since I was a little boy. Did Paul Dorfman ever discuss his relationship with Jack Ruby? No. Subsequent to Ruby shooting Oswald, did Paul Dorfman ever discuss Jack Ruby with you? No, never. You never discussed your phone call with Jack Ruby with Paul Dorfman? Not that I remember. Did you ever have business lunches with Paul Dorfman? I met his son, Alan, through Paul. Are you familiar with the Waste Handling Union in Chicago? No. Did you know Paul Dorfman was president of that union in the late 1940s? Could have been, I don't remember. Are you aware of how Mr. Dorfman came to be president of that union? No. What other meetings with Mr. Hoffa subsequent to the 1959 meeting did you have? I don't think I had any meetings with him after that. That was your only meeting? I had a few meetings in relationship to placement of the bond. We might have met 10 or 15 times. We met in Detroit, Washington, and Chicago. After the placement of the bond, after every writing of the bail bond when he was incarcerated in the penitentiary. Did you ever meet Irving Davidson? I don't know. I might have. Is that name familiar with you? It doesn't ring a bell. Do you know Mr. Hank Greenspun? No. Did you ever meet with Mr. Hoffa, Mr. Davidson, and Mr. Greenspun? I don't remember meeting. I don't believe I ever met with Mr. Greenspun. I don't know if I ever met with Mr. Davidson or not. Under no circumstances did I ever meet Mr. Hoffa other than arranging the bond or bonds for him. So let me pause right here. So for some reason, the HSCA had some reason to believe that Irwin Weiner met with Hoffa, Davidson, and Greenspun, assuming here simultaneously, because he's asking him about them individually, and he's saying no, no. And he's asked, did you ever meet with Mr. Hoffa, Mr. Davidson, and Mr. Greenspun? He's implying at one meeting. So we've got here some fair indication that there was some kind of connection between Hoffa and Greenspun and Davidson and Weiner. I find this very intriguing. Why? I'm not sure yet. I don't know if I met Mr. Davidson or not. Under no circumstances did I ever meet Mr. Hoffa other than arranging the bond or bonds for him. During what period of time were your organizations active in placing bonds for local Teamster pension funds? Probably from 1960 to 1963. 60 to 63? Right. During that period of time, how often would you say you met with Jimmy Hoffa? All right, I have to pause real quick. And to my guys in the research chat, I'm having some major alarm bells going off here. We really need to come to understand the relationships between Irwin, Weiner, and Sam Giancana. This is like paramount. Because under no circumstances are you going to have orders filtered down from Meyer Lansky to Giancana. Actually, let me rephrase that. From Meyer Lansky through... what the fuck is his name? Giancana's boss. The Jew. Hiram Larner. So, Hyman Larner. So you got the orders coming down from Meyer Lansky to Hyman Larner to Giancana to somebody or a series of somebodies to Ralph Paul to Jack Ruby. That's how it had to have been. Ralph Paul was the man behind the scenes in Dallas. Ralph Paul John is his real name. Everyone calls him Ralph Paul because they're too fucking stupid to realize his last name was John. All you got to do is Google Ralph Paul obituary, and you're going to come up with his real last name, but not a single fucking dumb Kennedy researcher in 60 years has been able to figure that out. Really, just fucking astonishing. So, the relationship between Irwin, Weiner, and Giancana needs to be fleshed out. Needs to be fleshed out because we need to figure out the actual chain of command for Jack Ruby to Chicago. During that period of time, how often would you say you met with Jimmy Hoffa? That's from 60 to 63. Once I placed the bond, I had no reason to meet with him. How often did you meet with Mr. Alan Dorfman during that time period? Alan's a friend of mine. I can meet with him anytime. Did you have business dealings with Mr. Dorfman apart from the placement of the Teamster Pension Fund bonds? Not really, no. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Dorfman Jimmy Hoffa's relationship with Bobby Kennedy? I don't think so, no. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Hoffa his attitude towards Bobby Kennedy? No. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Dorfman his attitude towards the Kennedy administration? I don't know if I ever discussed it with him. No, I don't believe so. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Hoffa his attitude towards the Kennedy administration? No. Are you aware what the attitude of Mr. Hoffa was toward Bobby Kennedy and the Kennedy administration? I don't think he approved of him. I don't think he was very happy with him. How were you made aware of that fact? Just by what I read, the fact that Kennedy had formed a Hoffa squad and Hoffa went to the penitentiary. Mr. Dorfman was one of your closest friends and you never discussed this fact? I said he was a close friend. But you never discussed his attitude. I don't know if I did or not. Did you ever hear discussions at all with any individual concerning the assassination of Bobby Kennedy? No, other than what I have read, just common knowledge. Common knowledge of what? After the assassination of Bobby Kennedy. Did you ever hear discussions with any individual concerning an assassination of President Kennedy? Not really. Are you aware of any bonds that the Teamsters Union placed in Dallas, Texas through your organizations? I wouldn't know about that. You mean if we wrote bonds for Texas schools? Yes. It's very possible at the particular time. It's very possible. That would, you say, the aggregate number of bonds you wrote for the Teamster pension locals was, there are 1,000 locals approximately. I might have wrote the bonds for 60 or 70% of them. What would you say your total commission for writing these bonds was? The total I received? The total your company received? I don't know. There were two phases of the bonding of it. At one time, we were accepting commissions from a group of companies, and the commissions went back and it went into a bank account that guaranteed a loan to another insurance company, and that the insurance company defaulted, and the bank took the commissions that were known as an earned basis. They took those commissions to pay off the loan, and after that, the last 18 months is when I arranged for another group of companies to write the bond, and I got all of the commissions. I don't remember what was involved. This is your best estimate of the $200,000 that I received. Did you ever tell Jimmy Hoffa that the Kennedy administration was pressuring you to not write bonds for Teamsters, officers, or unions? I might have said that. What was Mr. Hoffa's reaction? I'm sure he wasn't too happy about it. I don't remember it. I might have said, you can expect it. What was the administration, in fact, pressuring you not to write bonds? Or was the administration, in fact, pressuring you not to write bonds? I believe it was. Who in the administration was pressuring you? A man called me, I believe a fellow by the name of Wally Sheridan, at that particular time. Walter Sheridan. That's who it would have been. I started to talk with him about the bonds over the telephone, and I refused to talk to him. What kind of pressure was it? With the companies and newspaper pressure. When was the phone call from Mr. Sheridan? I don't remember it. What type of pressure did he allegedly put on the companies if they continued to write bonds? I don't know. They would get in touch with the companies and ask a lot of questions, and the companies didn't like to be questioned. That was a form of pressure. There was a lot of newspaper publicity about it. Some companies shied away. You discussed this with Mr. Hoffa. At the time, yes. Are you aware of what activities Jack Ruby engaged in while he was in Chicago? No. Did you know why Jack Ruby moved from Chicago to Dallas? I have no idea. Do you know in Chicago Mr. Saul Polk? That's Polk. No. Do you know Mr. Dave Yaris? I know him, yes. How do you know Mr. Yaris? I've known him all my life. I've known him since I was a boy. All right. Let me pause right here. So here we come to Dave Yaris. And Dave Yaris is one of the people I've talked about the fewest, the least. He was most certainly the shooter between the pergola and the fence. The one that was edited out of the Knicks film. He's then photographed again in the... Which film is it? The MCA film? The DCA film. He's captured again in the railroad yards in the DCA film. Clear as fucking day, Dave Yaris. And so my conclusion on Dave Yaris, and when you get into the documents the FBI has on Dave Yaris, which are not in the Kennedy documents, again, by the way, on him and Lenny Patrick, you can find out that Dave Yaris was they were keeping tabs on him and Lenny Patrick before the assassination. Both of them, they lost track of him for like a week, okay? Around the time of the assassination, they lose track of Lenny Patrick and they lose track of Dave Yaris. And then you got all the stuff that goes on with David Leon Miller and the fucking Isidore Max Miller and Marion Meharg, the Marion Meharg files. The guys in my research chat, we haven't gotten to this yet, but pull the stuff on Marion Meharg. You'll get a kick out of it. Because when we actually get through and do all the Marion Meharg stuff, the conclusion I drew was that David Leon Miller and Isidore Max Miller, they're brothers. They were working for Chicago Mob, but in Dallas, low-level fucking guys doing numbers. And both of them moved to Atlanta, right? And so, but it turns out that these guys allegedly were renting a room from Bertha Cheek, renting a place from Bertha Cheek during the week of the assassination. But both of them seem to have alibis. Both of them were fucking in Atlanta at the time of the assassination, right? So we got they have the alibi game going on again, right? So basically, what I concluded, based on the totality of circumstances between the Dave Yaris files, the Lenny Patrick files held by the FBI, combined with all of the Marion Meharg stuff, which led to David Leon Miller, to me, it seemed pretty obvious that David Leon Miller and his brother Isidore Max Miller were both in fucking Atlanta at the time, and that it was Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris who were utilizing their identities in Dallas when they were there for that week. And here's another indication of this, okay? So you've got the tower man, Lee Bowers, right? One of the vehicles that drove through, one of the three vehicles that drove through the fucking parking lot behind the grassy knoll had a Georgia license plate. All right? There you go. There's your Georgia license plate. So what I concluded happened is that Dave Yaris, on his way to meet with Lenny Patrick in Dallas, stops in Atlanta, all right? So they would drive past I-10, which would be the normal way to go, up to I-40, or is it 40? I think it might be 40. Up to Atlanta, where he then takes David Leon Miller's car, drives it from Atlanta to Dallas. The car is then seen by Lee Bowers behind the fence. And then you have Dave Yaris being the shooter between the pergola and the fence, and I believe Lenny Patrick was his spotter. The Lenny Patrick stuff is easy. I thought another thing that with Lenny Patrick was that there was a witness that said they saw Bernard Barker right behind the fence. But when you look at Bernard Barker at the time, and when you look at Lenny Patrick, they were like identical brothers, right? They could have been brothers at the time. So I think the one witness who claims to have seen Bernard Barker was actually seeing Lenny Patrick. All right. So there's, in a nutshell, my Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick data, which brought me to the conclusion that that's exactly who the fuck they were. And then the images in the Knicks film and in the DCA film, to me, were conclusive enough that it was Dave Yaris to put all that together, right? So, but I genuinely, I'll have to admit, for the next book, I have to go back through all the stuff I just told you about. I need to go through it again with a fine-tooth comb so I can write it up, because I don't have the ability to like explain it in a coherent way other than I was fucking, putting shit together out on a wing and a prayer at the time. So, but I stand by my conclusions on the Dave Yaris stuff, 100%. And then that all coincides with the guys who were staying in Bertha Cheek's place, the shoe shine guy. They had testimony from the kid who was working there allegedly before. There's a whole lot of stuff connected to that I still need to really dig into to solidify this idea. But Dave Yaris was definitely one of the shooters he was definitely the shooter between the pergola and the fence. And so I'm glad that we're finally getting to something involving this. But I'm going to have to spend a couple days on the Marion Meharg stuff with you guys, because no one else was able to put that shit together either. Pretty pathetic. All right. So, do you know Mr. Dave Yaris? I know him, yes. How do you know Mr. Yaris? I've known him all my life. I've known him since I was a boy. So, Irwin Weiner, who got a call from Jack Ruby, he's good friends with Mr. Yaris since the time he was a kid. This is what I think is kind of funny, because back in the early days, in the 30s and 40s, Jack Ruby came up with Dave Yaris and Lenny Patrick. They were a trio, right? Irwin Weiner is saying the same thing. He came up with Dave Yaris, but he didn't know Jack Ruby. Give me a fucking break. Like, Dave Yaris, Lenny Patrick, and Jack Ruby were a trio. They were glued at the hip. So the idea that Weiner didn't know Ruby on this level, total bullshit. Is he a personal friend of yours? I was friendly with him. I knew him. Do you have anything to do with Mr. Yaris? No. Did you see Mr. Yaris when you were in Miami during your indictment? I don't think so. Did you see Mr. Yaris in Miami at any other time? Probably. Who did you meet with in conjunction with Mr. Yaris in Miami? It was an attorney friend of mine who has since passed away, Mr. Brodkin. Brodkin? Really? See, I hear that and I think Mario Brod, B-R-O-D, who was a mob go-between to the CIA. So here we go again, guys. Let's pull everything on Mr. Brodkin and Mario Brod, B-R-O-D. That'll connect us to George de Mohrenschildt also, and Philip Itkin. All right. So, what was the occasion of that meeting? My wife and he and his friend and his wife went to Florida. Mr. Yaris lived in Florida, and we went out to dinner together. At what time in Florida? Oh, that would be in the early 50s, mid 50s. Do you know Mr. Lenny Patrick? Yes. How do you know Mr. Patrick? I know him the same way in the same neighborhood since I was a kid. Did you ever have any business dealings with Mr. Patrick? No. How often did you meet with Mr. Patrick? I met with Mr. Patrick, it would be accidentally. Frequently? Not frequently, once a year? I never met with him. I never had a planned meeting with him. It would just be like running into him at a restaurant. Do you know if Mr. Jack Ruby knew Mr. Patrick? I have no idea. Do you know Mr. Barney Baker? Yes. How do you know Mr. Baker? All right, now please note, Mr. Barney Baker is different from Barney Barker, Bernard Barker. Okay, there's like 3 Barney Bakers and Barker combinations of people involved here. Barney Baker is Robert Bernard Baker, who is the fucking fat guy on the overpass in the white shirt at the time of the assassination. Ryan Dawson believes he was a shooter who didn't shoot. I can't make that same conclusion. There is, I guess, some information about a rifle being passed around on the overpass. I never really dug too much into that. But I can't come to the same conclusion that Robert Bernard Baker, who was Barney Baker, was on the overpass. But I don't know if he was a potential shooter or not. I just assumed so because Mr. Dawson made that conclusion. And when it comes to the little stuff like this, Dawson was usually not wrong about stuff. So, but Barney Baker was definitely there. Did he have a rifle in his hand? Ryan thinks so. Me, I just took his word for it. So we'll see. How do you know Mr. Baker? I know him through working with Alan Dorfman. Did Mr. Dorfman introduce you to Mr. Baker? I don't remember who introduced me to him. I think Paul Dorfman introduced me to Mr. Baker. What period of time was that? I don't know. How often have you met Mr. Baker? I never met with Mr. Baker, a premeditated meeting, never met with him. Were you ever at any meeting that anybody else arranged with Mr. Baker? No. Did you ever have any business dealings with Mr. Baker? No, I haven't. Do you know if Jack Ruby knew Mr. Baker? I have no idea. Have you ever heard that Jack Ruby called Mr. Baker? I don't know that either. No one has ever informed you that Jack Ruby telephoned Mr. Baker? Nobody has. Wait a minute. That same newspaper man asked me about Barney Baker. What was your response? My response was the same as it is now. All right, so let me pause right here. So he's talking about the phone call Jack Ruby made to Robert Bernard Baker. And I'll have to double check this, but I know the series of phone calls started like 2 or 3 days before the assassination, and some calls were made on the evening before the assassination. But what you end up having is Jack Ruby calls Robert Bernard Baker, who's the right-hand man of Jimmy Hoffa. Okay. And then I forget if it was that day or this is then the follow-up the day after the day before the assassination. But then Robert Bernard Baker ends up calling Dave Yaris. And then yes, it was the day before the assassination. Robert Bernard Baker calls Dave Yaris. Dave Yaris calls Lenny Patrick. And somehow I believe Jack Ruby is in on this three-way phone call, right? So what was going on here is that these guys were all in fucking Dallas, right? And so Jack Ruby calls Robert Bernard Baker a couple days before the assassination, and he establishes that phone call is well established. Then the other series of phone calls from the residences of Robert Bernard Baker up in New Jersey, Lenny Patrick in Chicago, and Dave Yaris in Miami. You have this three-way of phone calls the day before the assassination, right? So Robert Bernard Baker calls Dave Yaris, who calls Lenny Patrick the day before the assassination, right? What is this? This is an alibi phone call because these three fucks were already in Dallas, right? And all of them were on the fucking knoll of the overpass, right? Lenny Patrick and Dave Yaris were between the pergola and the fence, and Robert Bernard Baker was the fat white guy in the white shirt on the overpass. So they're all in fucking Dallas. Those phone calls made the day before were alibi phone calls, right? Obviously made by family or something. Hey, I need you to make this call at this time, whatever. When you're dealing with phone calls, there's always a ton of unidentified phone calls, and those unidentified calls that come from certain numbers that come from payphones and shit, right? Because the payphone was the burner of the day, right? All right. Do you know Mr. Lewis Kuttner? Kuttner? Yes. That attorney in Chicago? Yes. I don't think I know him. Years ago, I might have done some business for him in relation to a bond. Do you remember what the bond was or who it was for? I don't remember. Do you know Mr. Dusty Miller? I met Mr. Dusty Miller. How did you meet Mr. Dusty Miller? It was in relation to the Teamster bond in 1959? Yes. Who introduced you to Mr. Miller? I don't know. Could have been, I don't know. I don't remember. Okay. Let me stop you right here. Once again, this is so juicy. There is no Dusty Miller. There is no Dusty Miller. Okay. Dusty Miller is an alias for Dave Yaris, whose birth name was David Miller. Okay. So Dave Yaris, his birth name was David Miller, just like David Leon Miller. Okay. And remember, Leon is an assumed name that you pick up like a rank. A trusted name within the mob is a rank. Just like Jack Leon Ruby, right? Same thing. And Dave Leon Yaris, right? So Leon is an assumed name that these guys all adopt at some point in time. And I believe it's a symbol of trust amongst probably just the Jews. I don't know. We'll see. But Wayne is another one. You'll see Wayne adopted as a middle name also among a lot of these guys. And I came to conclude, as did Ryan Dawson, that these are assumed names that are ranks of some sort. But yeah, Dusty Miller is Dave Yaris. Dusty Miller is allegedly the head of the Teamsters in Miami, but that's fucking Dave Yaris as an alias. Who introduced you to Mr. Miller? I don't know. It could have been, I don't know. I don't remember. What business dealings had you had with Mr. Miller? None. Did you talk to Mr. Miller concerning the placement of a bond? Probably at the time. Did you ever discuss with Mr. Miller the problems Jimmy Hoffa was having with the Kennedy administration? No, I just knew him superficially. Did Mr. Miller ever discuss with you Edward Grady Parton? No. Did you ever meet Mr. Parton? If I'm not mistaken, Mr. Parton was from Florida. That's Partin. I think I had written a bond where Mr. Parton was an officer, and I think there was a money discrepancy, but that they were accusing Mr. Parton of taking some money. But I never heard any more. I got some letters from some attorneys, if I remember correctly, either representing the union or the rank and file complaints about Mr. Parton. When was that? That would have been when I had the Teamster bond. Had you ever met with Mr. Parton? I don't believe I did. Do you know Mr. Russell Matthews? That's R.D. Matthews. No. Do you know Mr. David Elatkin? Elatkin. No. Do you know Mr. Harry Hall, also known as Harry Haller? Haller. I think I do. How do you know Mr. Haller? I think I met him, it was in relation, I think I met him through one of the members of the pension board, Teamster pension board. I don't remember. The name sounds familiar. All right, let me stop right here. So Mr. Harry Haller, Mr. Harry Hall or Harry Haller, I've talked about before. He is one of the names of on one of the documents that's being withheld from release. Mr. Harry Haller is also involved in an incident involving Jack Valenti and some fucking stolen stationery, stolen White House stationery that brought Jack Valenti into this investigation of some flipping, some Jeep, some vehicle thing, some Jeep thing, some kind of fraud. But somehow Jack Valenti was involved with Mr. Haller here, and those documents are fucking withheld. If you Google Harry Haller and Jack Valenti, or Harry Hall and Jack Valenti, you will come up with some of the stuff, I believe, from the, what's that CIA bitch's website? Mary fucking, the JFK research site run by the CIA. Mary, I forget her fucking last name. You know who I'm talking about. Mary Farrell, who's married to Buck Farrell, the CIA agent involved in MK Ultra. Right? I can't. It's unfucking believable. Like, anyone who doesn't think that her site is anything but a CIA gatekeeping website is fucking crazy. I would love to get a fucking subscription there, but can somebody gift me a subscription to that fucking website? It would be fantastic. So my name's not on it. That would be fucking great. No, she's got some great documents there, but the good stuff is buried. Like, it's a gatekeeping site. You got to know what you're looking for to find it there. Otherwise, you're never going to find anything in any kind of highlighted sections. What were the circumstances of that meeting with Mr. Haller? Just a casual meeting. Did you say Teamster Pension Board, Pension Fund? Who on the pension board introduced him? I think it was a member from Ohio. I don't remember. What conversations do you recall that you've had with Mr. Haller? I never had any previous conversations other than general conversations. Is that the same fellow? All right, so let me just point out one more thing. So again, we have connections between Jack Valenti and Jack Ruby through Harry Haller and Irwin Weiner. So something tells me Jack Valenti knew Irwin Weiner also. I never had any previous conversations other than general conversation. Is that the same fellow? Do you know Mr. Lawrence Myers, Meyers? No. Do you know Mrs. Jean West? No. Do you know, she's also known as Jean Aase, Aase? No. Do you know Mr. James Braden? Who? James Braden? No. Where were you when President Kennedy was assassinated on November 22nd? I don't remember whether I was in Chicago or Florida. I could have been in Florida at the time. Okay, so let me just pause right here. Everybody knows where they were when Kennedy got killed, so he's just lying. He was either in Chicago or Florida. Is it possible he was in Dallas? I don't know. It's possible. I haven't put him there. But we know that there was a number of mob guys there and support team guys there, right? There were a bunch of people in photographs in Dealey Plaza that none of us have been able to identify, like the black guy in the fucking suit standing by the pergola, right? Nobody knows who the fuck that guy is. What were you doing in Florida at the time? Probably preparing for my legal matter with attorneys. Were you in Miami during the funeral of the president? I don't remember if I was. When were you in Cuba and you saw Mr. Traficante at the casino? Did you see Mr. Traficante at any other time while you were in Cuba? I saw him in Florida. Did you see Mr. Traficante any other time in Cuba? No. Did you know Mr. Traficante had been in prison while he was in Cuba? No. Did Mr. Traficante ever discuss that fact with you? No. Mr. Weiner, going back to your placement of the Teamster pension bonds, it was for every union employee or officer that had access to the Teamster funds or property that belonged to the union or the international. Was that an outgrowth of the Landrum-Griffin Act? That was a result of the Landrum-Griffin Act. It was passed September 14th, 1959. That the act passed? I don't remember. You were in business with Mr. Alan Dorfman prior to the passage of the act. I was what? You were in business with Mr. Dorfman prior to the passage of the act. As a matter of fact, I wasn't in business with him at that time. It was Saul Schwartz. Mr. Alan Dorfman personally introduced you to Mr. Jimmy Hoffa. Is that correct? Correct. It could have been Paul Dorfman who introduced me to Jimmy Hoffa. How shortly after passage of that act did you first meet with Jimmy Hoffa? I don't remember. When they needed the placement of the bonds? Could it have been September 17th, which would have been 3 days after the passage of the act? I don't have any idea of the date. Is it possible it was September 17th? It's possible. It could be any date in that area. I don't remember when. How did Mr. Dorfman choose you to place the bond that was necessary pursuant to that act? Because I was in the bond business and I knew him and he introduced me to his son, Saul Schwartz, and we got together to try to place a bond. Apparently, Mr. Hoffa contacted him. You testified that your company wrote bonds for approximately 18 months. In a group of companies that you were affiliated with, yes. And would Central Casualty Company be one of these companies? Yes, Central Casualty. United Benefit Fire and Oxford Agency. Oxford Agency? The Oxford Agency is the agency that eventually got the commissions. Was Cosmopolitan Insurance Company one of them? I don't think so. What was the Weiner Volin Insurance Company? That is an insurance agency. Was that one of the companies? Yes, that is my partner and myself. After 18 months, what were the chances that your corporation would no longer be writing bonds? I forgot what happened at the end of the 18-month period. It seemed that one of the companies, in order to write that bond, you had to be qualified on the federal list. It seemed one of the lead companies, for some reason or other, because of the interpretation of the financial statement by the Treasury Department, it had taken them off the list and they had to put another group of companies together. I arranged for the second group of companies. Are you affiliated with the second group of companies? Just in the capacity of an agent placing the business. How much were you paid to arrange for the second group of companies to write business? A couple $100,000, I think, if I remember correctly, in that area. Who were the primary officers of that second group of companies? The second group of companies was one company. It was called the Resolute Insurance Company out of Hartford, Connecticut. They just reinsured with Lloyd's. That was the extent of it. Who were the individuals in Resolute Insurance Company? A fellow by the name of Lou Morgenstern, who has since passed away. He was the president and owner. On the day of President Kennedy's assassination, do you recall how you first heard the news? I don't remember. You don't remember whether or not you were at Chicago or Miami at the time. Where I was, I don't remember how I got the news. Who was the first person you spoke to when you heard President Kennedy was assassinated? I don't understand. It was shocking. Most people remember where they were. I don't remember where I was at the time. I could have been in Florida. What was your reaction upon hearing the news? Surprised, shocked, felt bad about it, the same any other citizen would. Do you know Mr. Ellis Gruber? No. I don't know the name Ellis Gruber. Mr. Weiner, you've stated that your one business dealing you recall in Dallas was with Mr. Saul Amon. Is that correct? What was the nature of business you had with Mr. Amon? With Amon? Yes. He was in the building of cooking machines. How did you first come in contact with him? With Mr. Amon? Yes. I met him in Chicago. Who introduced you? I don't remember how I met him. What type of bonds or business did you do with him? Did I do with him? Yes. I had loaned him some money. As a matter of fact, he was in an executive placement. He had an executive placement business, and I had 25% of it. How much money did you loan him? The loan was actually a default on a loan that I guaranteed at the bank for him. It was not a loan. He defaulted on a fund that I had paid off and that he was responsible for, and then at a later date he called me and paid me the money. He had a loan to the bank, and you paid his loan to the bank? I had guaranteed his loan at the bank. How did you come to guarantee his loan to the bank? I don't remember. Had you known Mr. Rahman before this? Oh, sure. I wouldn't do it for a stranger. How did you first come to meet him? I believe it was through an attorney by the name of Albert Shepard. Where is that attorney located? Right now he is in Los Angeles practicing law. How much money was the loan for? I think I guaranteed a $35,000 loan. I think I paid about $15, something like that. What business dealings had you had with the insurance agent in Los Angeles prior to that? He was an attorney here first. He was an attorney in Chicago. You asked me where he was at right now. I said Los Angeles. He was an attorney in Chicago? Sure. That's why you guaranteed this loan. I guaranteed it for two reasons. One, we were friendly, and two, I was sort of in business with him at the time and making some money with him, so I guaranteed the loan. Have you had any other business dealings with an individual in Dallas? Just with Aman. None other? None other that I know of. Do you know Mr. Nofio Pecora? Nofio Pecora, real name Onofrio Pecorora. He is one of the right-hand men of Carlos Marcello, ran the town and country. Had some business dealings in Dallas, and for some reason I associate him with Ferry. I can't recall why, though. No. In your discussions with Mr. Traficante, did he ever discuss with you the CIA plots against Fidel Castro? I never had any discussions with Mr. Traficante other than how are you and that sort of thing. Never got involved with him in any way. Did he ever discuss with you these plots? No. Did Mr. Giancana ever discuss the plots with you? Absolutely not. When did you first hear that Jack Ruby had shot Lee Harvey Oswald? When did I first hear it? Yes. When he did it? Where were you at the time? I don't remember where I was at the time either. I could have been in Florida or Chicago. I had to be in Florida because when he shot Oswald, I had to be in Florida at that time. Why were you in Florida? Because they called my daughter right after that. Your daughter called you in Florida? She didn't know where I was at. I called her the following day. They might have called her the following day. What was your first reaction upon hearing Jack Ruby shot Oswald? I didn't believe it. It was beyond my comprehension as to how or why. Did you speak to anybody about the fact that you knew Jack Ruby? I might have. With whom might you have spoken? I don't have any idea. Did you speak with Mr. Alderizio? It could be. I don't know. I don't know if at that time I knew who Jack Ruby was. Did you speak with Mr. Traficante? No. Do you know if anybody hired Jack Ruby to kill Oswald? No. Do you know if anybody hired Lee Harvey Oswald to assassinate President Kennedy? I wouldn't know that either. To clarify the question I asked before, you answered the question concerning the Dallas Cabana Hotel. Are you familiar with any financial arrangements for that hotel? No, I'm not. Are you aware of the Cabana Hotel in Atlanta? No. You ever heard of that hotel? I might have, but I don't remember hearing it. Are you familiar with any financial arrangements for that hotel? No. Mr. Chairman, that concludes the questioning we have of this witness. Any questions that the committee members desire to ask at the time will be appropriate. Mr. Pryor says, Mr. Weiner, you indicated that you talked to Mike Shore recently about his call from Ruby and that Ruby was asking him to get a lawyer for him in Los Angeles. No, I spoke to Mike Shore 2 days ago, and I told him I would be in Washington, and I told him what for. In telling him that, I evidently triggered his memory, and he told me he repeated what he had told me before. That he had helped arrange for the legal defense of Jack Ruby through Earl Ruby, his brother, who had come to him. Why would Ruby need a lawyer in Los Angeles? Eventually, I think the lawyer to be hired was from San Francisco. I think that is the attorney Michael Shore knows. I am trying to think of his name. He was getting a lot of publicity and write-ups. He was sort of flamboyant character. I can't think of his name, but he was from San Francisco. He did, I believe, represent Ruby for a while and then withdrew, if I remember correctly. Was his name Melvin Belli? That's his name. Okay, so here we have another connection to Melvin Belli through the mafia. via Michael Shore. So Michael Shore, who's close with Irwin Weiner, was also directly connected with Melvin Belli. I guess this is part of the arrangement. But remember, Melvin Belli was kicking it with Menachem Begin and fucking... and what's his name? The other guy. This is in some of my other work. Menachem Begin being the big name. But Melvin Belli used to host Menachem Begin, and he'd get hookers and stuff back at his place. Ruby was trying to get Belli to represent him. I think Michael Shore was instrumental. I believe he was, based on the conversation that I had with Michael Shore. All right, we have to pull everything on Michael Shore. This guy seems kind of key. Mr. Pryor asked, did Michael Shore give you any indication of why Ruby would hire a West Coast lawyer for himself in Dallas? I don't know. If I were to rationalize, I would say that Earl Ruby probably heard of Melvin Belli, and Michael Shore was a friend of Earl Ruby's, and evidently Michael Shore helped try to arrange for Belli to represent him. That's what I gather out of my conversation with Michael Shore. A month or a little more before the assassination of President Kennedy, you received a call from Ruby, as well as some of your friends like Michael Shore, Barney Baker. I never got a call from Barney Baker. I don't know if I received a call from Michael Shore at this time. Ruby did call a number of your friends. I don't know that either. There was no discussion between you and your friends about Ruby's problems. No. After everything happened, naturally, when somebody would meet, we would talk about it at a particular time, but I don't remember any of my friends saying that Ruby called them. Mr. Fithian. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weiner, when Ruby called you, I believe you said in answer to the council's question that you recognized his voice. Am I correct? I didn't recognize his voice. He introduced himself over the phone. This is Jack Ruby, Earl Ruby's brother. I'm assuming that is what happened at the time. I never knew Jack Ruby well. I never knew him socially or in any possible way. Our paths never crossed, other than the fact he was Earl Ruby's brother, who was a friend of mine. Did you know him in Chicago? Yes. How long before he called you on the labor problem did you say that you had known him in Chicago? I'm assuming it was in the 1930s, late 1930s, or a graduate from high school in 1934. It could have been prior to that. Did you ever know Ruby and Alan Dorfman to be associated with one another, to be seen together? No, I believe that based on conversations I had after that. And as a matter of fact, I told Alan I was coming here. I had met with him and told him I was coming here. He never led me to believe that he knew Ruby or anything like that. Could you associate in your mind roughly? I know it's been a long time. Can you associate in your mind roughly whether or not Ruby would have been in Chicago with the possibility of knowing or associating with Dorfman prior to Dorfman's difficulties, which caused him to leave Chicago? I don't know that either. I have no way of knowing. Alan Dorfman was a young kid then, in his 30s. I think he's about 52 or 53. That would be a long time ago. Mr. Fithian asks, would you again explain to the committee why you think that Jack Ruby called you? This seems to be a minor difficulty that he is in, a little labor problem. What he wanted to do with me was to try to get me, evidently he wanted me to get an injunction against the other club. If I remember correctly, he would have put up the bond with the court in order to do that. I understand that. It just seems a little difficult for me to grasp the argument that Ruby would have called you over this little difficulty, or that Ruby would have tried to seek this fairly famous San Francisco lawyer. I didn't try to see him. His brother tried to see him as a result of Mike Shore. Mike Shore didn't know Jack Ruby. He knew Earl Ruby. Earl Ruby was looking to retain counsel to help his brother. It wasn't Jack Ruby that had any contact with Michael Shore. I don't believe Michael Shore even knew Jack Ruby. I guess my quandary still persists. Ruby's problems seemed so small. Wait a minute, I think we just got mixed up a bit. The reason that Earl was looking to retain counsel for him is because he killed Oswald. When Earl Ruby got involved with Michael Shore, was saying after the slaying of Oswald. I had to step out for a few minutes. I may have missed this. When Ruby called you, where were you living at that time? 7345 North Damon in Chicago. He called you from Dallas. I think he called me at my office or my home. I don't remember. He was calling from Dallas? Yes, he called from Dallas. His difficulty was in Dallas. He called me. Doesn't that strike you as being a little curious that for someone who had, by your description, such a very casual knowledge or acquaintance with you, hadn't seen you in 15 or 30 years perhaps, that he would A, know that you were in the business that you were in, the bond business, and therefore in a position to help him professionally, or B, know how to locate you, and C, bother to call somebody in Chicago when his little difficulty over an amateur stripper was in Dallas. That does not seem to be a very credible story. I don't care whether it's credible or not. That's exactly what happened. It was not incredible for a man like Ruby to hiss Oswald, but he did too. Nobody would have dreamed that he would. I guess what I'm saying is the difficulty I'm having with the fact that he might have remembered. He might have called his brother for help, and his brother might have referred him to me. He never called me since. The only phone call he ever placed with me was the one we're talking about. How well did you know Earl Ruby? I went to school with Earl Ruby. I knew him fairly well, the same as you know somebody you went to school with. Had you maintained a continuing relationship with him or acquaintance with Earl Ruby after he went to school? No, if I would see him we would talk. Where was Earl Ruby now during this period? I don't know. Was he in Chicago or San Francisco? I don't know where he was. I don't know where Earl Ruby was either. Do you know Earl Ruby better than Jack Ruby? I didn't know Jack Ruby at all, other than he was Earl's brother. I think those are all the questions I have. Mr. Dodd? Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Weiner, did your daughter have occasion to be in your office in Chicago from time to time? No. It would have been impossible for Jack Ruby to have called your office at the time to try to reach you. He must have called your home. Jack Ruby never talked to my daughter. He never talked to her at all? No. So it could have been either at home or the office. I don't remember which number he called. You have the number of it. The phone number was SH3-6865. That'd be my home number. Is your home number listed in the directory? Yes. What was your relationship with Earl Ruby? Just went to school with him and knew him. I had no relationship with him other than that, just other than knowing him and going to school with him. I understand that from your testimony. I appreciate that relationship, however slight it may have been around 1963. Had you seen him recently? Had you run into him? No, as a matter of fact, I think I bumped into him in the gym one time prior to that, I believe. It was the first time I saw him for years and years. That had to have been in the mid-50s. That was the last time I saw him. I hadn't seen him since, I don't think. Did you inquire why Jack Ruby called you? I don't know. So there was really no relationship to speak of at all with Earl Ruby. But your own testimony, there was none with Jack Ruby. In fact, even less with Jack Ruby. Less with Jack Ruby, and I just knew Earl Ruby. I mean, we were friendly. Maybe you can appreciate my quandary. Why did a fellow living in Dallas, Texas, that you have not seen in years, have had no contact with, had minimal contact, and is even exaggerating, I think, with his brother, why did he pick up a phone and call you at home? I haven't any idea. I'm sure he made some phone calls, long-distance phone calls, prior to calling me. Maybe from one of those. They have a record of that. Maybe from that you could find out how he got to me. What I'm intrigued by is whether or not you would have been curious as to why he would have called you. No, I was not at all curious. It did not surprise you? No, because that was my business. My business was writing bonds. Would not be curious about anybody wanting a bond. Calling you at home, writing a bond? I got calls any hour of the day at home or night. Was it common practice to get calls at home? Sure. I got oodles of calls at home. If I was not in the office, the service would tell them to call my home. In your testimony earlier, you indicated you had not been entirely accurate to a reporter who had called you recently asking you similar questions about a telephone conversation with Jack Ruby. I was as accurate as they were with me. Are you saying, in effect, Mr. Weiner, that you lied to the reporter? Anytime I can. You talked to Mr. Shore in the last week? Yes. In your conversation with Mr. Shore in the last week, did you discuss with him the alleged labor dispute that Jack Ruby was having at the time he made the conversation with you? No, I don't believe I did. I just told him I was coming. I don't remember if I did or not. Why don't you take a couple minutes and think? If you want me to say I did, I will say I did. I don't remember. Thinking about it would not help me. I don't remember what I said to him. I might have gone through the whole bit with him, but I don't remember if I did. How long ago did you talk to Mr. Shore? 3 or 4 days ago. How long ago was the phone? How long was the phone conversation? I don't know. There have been several phone conversations. It could have been short. Could have been long. I don't know. The last 2 or 3 days, there have been several phone conversations. Since I got the subpoena, there have been several. It was not in relation to the subpoena. How many times have you talked to Mr. Shore? When I received the subpoena, let me see that day I received it. I got it. It's on May 4th. Since May 4th, I'd say I spoke to Mr. Shore maybe 7 or 8 times, which is not unusual. Your testimony to me right now is that you can't remember whether or not you talked about the alleged labor dispute with Jack Ruby, who called you about, right? Right, I don't remember talking about that. I just remember talking about that I'm coming here in relation to the Jack Ruby thing, and that he told me, yes, I tried to get him Melvin Belli. Did you discuss the Ruby phone call to you at all in your conversation? I said I might or might have not. I talked to him about it before. I don't remember if I talked to him about it at this time. Do you recall whether or not you told Mr. Shore what the substance of the conversation was? Repeat that. Do you recall telling Mr. Shore what the substance of the Ruby telephone call to you was? On the last occasion, I don't remember. If I did remember, if I did say it, I would say it, but I don't remember whether I did say it, because there would be nothing wrong in me discussing it with him if I did. I'm not trying to conceal anything. I just don't remember. You don't remember? No, I don't remember what I said to him at that particular time, other than just telling him I'm coming here. I might have went through the whole thing with him, but I just don't remember doing it. I have no further questions, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. You mentioned Jack Ruby called you at your home telephone. Do you recall what your business phone number was at the time in 1963? Yes, Harrison 427-4848, the same number. Did you have access to any other business phones at that time, or any other business phone numbers he might have called you at? I don't remember if I did or not. I'm sure he would have not called me at any of the other numbers other than those two, at home or the bonding company. Thank you. Are there any further questions? Mr. Weiner, let me go back to that phone conversation. If I were to tell you that Jack Ruby made the phone call to you around noon on a Wednesday at your home, I presume that you would not quarrel with that. I don't know if that's a fact or not. Was there any record of a phone call to your office, the secretary or something, or someone referring him to you at home? And that cuts off right there, and there's nothing else. And I'm assuming there's nothing else because it seems like they're wrapping up this whole interview, and it probably just cuts off because that's close to the end. This is from the HSCA Volume 9. So, I'm enjoying this little Chicago thing. And remember, I'm still putting off getting back to the Lauren Hall interview by Harold Weisberg. Ugh. We got to get to it at some point just for documentation purposes, if no other reason, for future researchers. But I'm putting it off for now, and we're going to continue on this tip of Chicago. Let me see what I can't dig up for tomorrow. But that's going to do it for today, guys. If you haven't bought the book, please buy the book. It's on Amazon, all that good shit. Sign up for my Bloody History of World War II on Substack. It's been getting really some amazing feedback. People are really enjoying it. No one else is talking about Hitler out there. So, and yeah, that's pretty much it. So I'm taking up, obviously I always need financial collections. I'm trying to take up a collection for a new Mac so I can continue my notes. Because I already have 200 notes put together. I plan on releasing another batch of 500 to 600 pages of notes, completely new, separate from my old notes, which will be for sale once I'm done with it. And then the new book will be based off of those notes, kind of how I work. So, yep, that'll be available, hopefully, fucking one of these days. But that's it for today, guys. We'll be back here tomorrow. Same bat time, same bat channel. Thanks.